thank you all for coming. It's another day of excitement for the KTTH Freedom Series. At the last minute, we thought about changing the topic because of its lack of timeliness, but we decided to stick with it instead. I want to go through a couple of things before I call out our panelists, as I do at every event. For those of you who are returning, you know the score. For those of you who have heard it on the podcast, you know the score. But just in case, I want to lay out some ground rules. First things first, wherever I go, whatever event I attend, the first question that everybody has nothing to do with the event. It has to do with the cultural crusader, Michael Medved. And you'll ask, how is he doing? He is doing very well. And as you heard, he's back on the air. I know he loves to be at all debates, but he's not quite up for the public appearance, and I said now is certainly the time he can rest. So I just want to share that with you so you don't have to worry. Michael is doing really well. The treatment was excellent. In fact, the doctor said not just good, excellent. So it's all good news on that score. Now, just a little bit about my task as moderator. What I try and do as a moderator is I will generally try and ask very difficult questions of the conservatives on the panel from a liberal perspective. And to do that, I'll go through the writings of the opposing side. In this particular case, I spent a considerable amount of time on the NAACP blog, as well as the ACLU blog, and a number of columns, of course, from our guest from The Stranger. And I tried to formulate questions that would be challenging accordingly. The reverse is also true. I try to ask and pose questions that are challenging to the liberal side, and I try and weigh that with an equal hand. I don't know if Councilmember Kshama Sawant's in the room, but she did at one point say, "Thank you for being fair," which was, as I like to say, either the greatest compliment or greatest insult I've ever received. I don't know which it was, but I like to think it was a nice compliment. So that is my task. Now, today is a little bit unique in that there'll be a number of questions that I'll ask that don't really put anyone on the spot. They're just a general open question. The goal is, of course, a civil debate. Now, this is where you come in. I want everybody to be passionate. I like it when people are excited and want to applaud or cheer or react with outrage. However, there's a limit to that. And I guess it's going to be kind of like audio pornography. I'll know it when I hear it, and then I will call you out and say, no, let's be a little bit more polite there. And as moderator, I also consider myself a total room dictator. So I will just point people out and say, be quiet. And then I'm very big, I'm generally friendly, but like the Hulk, you don't want to make me angry. So let's keep that all very, very polite. All right, so now, because what generally happens at these events is we have so many great things to talk about that we actually run out of time, I'd like to introduce our panel. Please welcome from the Seattle King County NAACP, the Development Director, Dr. Shali Sechrest. And conservative activist and entrepreneur Monique Venezuela Trudanowski. From the Seattle Stranger, columnist Charles Mudady. And the most unusual of all, Battling Ben Shapiro from 3 to 6 p.m. on KTTH. I'm turning this podium just a little bit so I can see you a bit better. I'm going to start with an open question. It has to deal with the definition of racism. Chris Matthews said recently, fairly recently, that racism is the belief that one race, whites, should rule over all other. Is he right? Is racism confined to whites? Why don't you start us off, Dr. Sechrest?
I believe the definition has shifted over the years. A lot of it goes into the power dynamic. Can anyone be a racist if they don't have the power that's associated with it. Usually they tie racism to white people because they've got the power to keep other people oppressed. Most would argue that Black people cannot be racist because there is no power that can affect anyone else's lives. That's the dynamic. That's usually where the color of one's skin is tied to racism itself. Why can't Black people be racist? Why can't Latinos be racist? It's the power, the shift of the dynamic. We've seen that change though, especially in recent times as we're starting to look at the dynamics of how we engage with one another when we're inside of a room. The conversations have changed from just the undoing the supremacy, the white supremacy, the institutional structures, and going back into just the differences of races of how we treat each other. Black and brown, the interactions between those two, Asian, all of those dynamics. So yes, I do agree with the initial definition, but I do recognize it's changing.
I fundamentally disagree with the basic definition, and I don't think it has anything to do with power. Power is a capacity. Racism is about a set of beliefs, and power is just the ability to enact those beliefs. So, in other words, you can have a racist who doesn't have the power to actually enact those beliefs, and that would be a less threatening racist, presumably, than a racist who actually has the power to use those beliefs. But, I mean, if you look at Zimbabwe, where white farmers have been thrown off their land, that's a pretty good example of Black racism. If you look at a situation like you said, I mean, first of all, if you look at there was a poll, Rasmussen poll in 2013, asking Americans who they believe is racist, and according to the Black community, a plurality of Blacks actually thought that Blacks were more racist than whites, according to the Rasmussen poll. 31% of Blacks said that Blacks were more racist than whites, 24% said whites were more racist than Blacks. So whether the definition or not has changed, the definition of racism should be that you believe that one race or any race, because of its inherent skin color or because of ethnicity or because of by dint of birth, that you are privileged beyond other races in terms of superiority. If you believe that under any circumstances, then that, by my lights, is the definition of racism. And anything else, I mean, if you want to give Black racism another name and say that it's not racism, it's just something else that's bad, then I suppose that it's some sort of linguistic difference. But the bottom line is it bad or is it good? And, you know, for my money, we might as well label it all racism because it's not exclusive to white folks.
Go ahead if you'd like to add. Charles, you look like you want to add something.
Yeah, you just mentioned Zimbabwe, right?
Mm-hmm.
I come from Zimbabwe, and I actually the white farmer issue in Zimbabwe, and I'm no supporter of Robert Mugabe by any measure. I mean, you can't. I mean, I'm not going to go and celebrate, anything that has to do with Robert Mugabe. I mean, I've been opposed to him. I've been opposed to Robert Mugabe since 1987. But if you look at the white farmer situation and the fact and the question of racism,
Before you continue, can I get you to hold the microphone?
oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Is it like this? All right. Okay, sorry about that. Sorry, I'm really lazy. I thought I was talking to myself in the room. And I have to remind myself, oh, there's an audience here that's hearing these thoughts. But no, I'm going to say this very quickly. Yeah, the whites were thrown off the land in Zimbabwe and so on and so on. And it was the stupidest thing that Mugabe could have ever done because blacks own the banks. It's really more complicated than a lot of people understood it. And it shouldn't have happened because you have to deal with history and you have to deal with the future and you just can't just change things in that manner, right? One. The quick thing is that as for racism, racism to me is always about advantage, purely. And I think that when there's no advantage at all, there's going to be very little racism. And so in the case of whenever you go to Africa, you'll find that actually the blacks come in completely rainbow colors themselves, and that they can be equally as awful to each other as any white person could be awful to a black person. And so the question would be then to say something like, what advantage is it when you hate another group of people? And often there has to be an advantage. Otherwise, you're not going to hate them. And this is what my position is.
Monique, you want to add anything?
I do. To me, the definition is not correct. What I've seen is racism, as I've experienced it, at one point was an emotion, an experience. Racism has become a commodity. It's a business. It's either one way for our political partisanship to pit one people against another, or it's one way to lift up another people against another. It's become a business. If we truly want to address racism, what would that be to some of the ne'er-do-wells that come into our communities? They'd have no reason to pillage and to go into the CVS pharmacy and burn it down. So to me, racism is less about the emotional experience. In 2015, it's become a business, and it's become a commodity, and it has become an excuse for intolerable behavior. The racism I experienced was very much emotion, but that's my definition of racism in 2015.
Would you like to respond at all, or shall we? Well, we're going to get into Baltimore here in just a couple of minutes. So let me start with Ben. Ben, the ACLU published a blog condemning broken windows policing. They pointed out the attempted enforcement of low-level crimes in Ferguson, jaywalking, Staten Island, selling loose cigarettes, Milwaukee, sleeping in a public park, all led to deaths of African-American males, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Dontre Hamilton, and we can now add Freddie Gray to that list. Given the incidents of police action creating these violent confrontations, wouldn't it be better for race relations in America to abandon this kind of policing?
No, it wouldn't, because broken windows theory, the idea that was originally proposed by James Q. Wilson, the idea was that if you let low-level crime go, then high-level crime will begin to occur more frequently. And therefore you have to enforce, for example, turnstile jumpers was the example that James Q. Wilson originally used when he was talking about it in the city of New York. It's been tremendously effective in lowering rates of crime. If you want to avoid bad relationships between, for example, the black community and the cops, then lowering rates of crime would be the key to doing that. And if policing low-level crime is the way of lowering crime and preventing higher-level crime, then that's going to be the best thing. Forget the relations between cops and civilians. It's going to be the best thing for the civilians who are involved. I mean, the biggest threat to young black men in America today is young black men in America today. And statistically speaking, it is young black men who are killing young black men. The chances of you as a young black man being killed by the police, statistically speaking, are about 1 in 60,000 in the United States. The chances of any person in this room being killed by a bee attack are 1 in 56,000. So your chances. So the idea that that low-level policing of crime is what is causing this is not true. I mean, it's not even true in the cases that are being cited particularly. It's certainly not true with regard to Michael Brown. Michael Brown was shot because Michael Brown went for a cop's gun inside the cop's car. Michael Brown was shot because he charged a cop by witness testimony, including the witness testimony of black witnesses. Eric Garner died because police were enforcing a law that, by the way, I think is a stupid law, but he died because he was resisting arrest and because the cops tried to put on him a submission hold, which is not a justification of excessive force, which I think there was in that case. The problem is excessive force. The problem is not policing of low-level crime and trying to do what many places are now doing, including New York City, which is get rid of low-level crime and pretending that this is going to solve the problem. It's not going to solve the problem. It's going to make the problem a lot worse because a lot more people are going to think they can get away with crime. And number one way to avoid confrontations with the police is not to commit crimes in the first place.
Charles or Dr. Seacrest, if you'd like to respond. I'd like to say one thing to the entire panel, though. As we go forward, I want to make sure you understand it's rather informal. I want to make sure everybody gets their point out, but as sometimes points are made over a period of time, I know it can be difficult to go back and respond to every point being made. So consider it like a conversation if you'd like to interject at any given point. But would either of you like to respond to what Ben had to say?
I would love to. Disagree with everything that you said, but here's why.
I can't believe it.
We've got to make certain that we find that balance. I'm with you. All crimes need to be enforced. We have officers there for a reason. We want to make certain that we are a law-abiding society. I agree with that part of it. No one in their right mind would ever say that if you see a crime being committed, just look the other way and pretend like it didn't exist. That goes without saying. But where I disagree with your argument is when you start to ask yourself, is this worth it? If you see someone who has a broken tail light and you see someone where you try to pursue, you have to think of what's the amount of force that I'm going to use in order to get this criminal? What's the threat to society? At some point, you've got to do that analysis of this human life. Is it worth taking this human life for someone who littered on the sidewalk?
I mean, I agree.
Someone who skipped out on transit fare?
I agree, but don't you think that it depends on the level of threat escalation? Meaning that if a cop pulls somebody over for a taillight, nobody in their right mind is going to say the cop should shoot the guy for a broken taillight. Right? I mean, nobody's saying that. But if you have a situation in which somebody's pulled over for a taillight and the person gets out of the car, confronts the cop, and goes for his gun, that's not the cop's fault for pulling the guy over for a broken taillight. It's the fault of the guy who went for the cop's gun.
Absolutely.
One moment. Sir, you are not the moderator. And one other point I'll make is I did put online, anybody can ask any question, and I will take a look at it and put it here. Plus, one moment, please. Plus, and both of our guests, sir, I can't see you or really understand what you're saying, but I will tell you this. This is for a broadcast, so things have to be on the microphone, first of all. Secondly, both panelists, and you can verify this, I have offered them the chance, which I did not offer to the conservative panelists, to address any specific issue that you wanted ahead of time. I did make that offer, did I not? So please, let's wait to actually hear the debate, which is what people paid to see. So, Dr. Seacrest, I want to get your response to what Ben was saying, or Charles, either one.
Yeah. Okay. This is really, really difficult because I believe in history and I believe in all these kinds of things. I think that they can explain things. And one of the situations here, and quite clearly, when you're looking at the case, and I was absolutely opposed, really opposed, to bringing out the fact that white cops are shooting black males. I was actually opposed to emphasizing that because I actually felt that precisely you would end up with this argument that Ben has presented, that actually black men are shooting black men more than white cops shoot black cops. And then that actually gives a short circuit to an answer that really demands a lot more attention and a lot more work. And I was actually, I read this and I was saying, no, this whole business, don't fall into this because you fall precisely into this trap. And then you end up saying like, yeah, it is true. It is quite true. But then there's white on white violence is equally as lethal. I mean, but that we've already lost the direction of the argument because now we're talking about white people shooting white people and black people shooting black people, and we're not talking about the issue as to what happens when somebody is jaywalking or somebody's dealing with a bus light ends up being policed in this manner, right? Now we're just talking about this other issue, which again, I mean, is kind of faulty. I'll admit it.
Charles,
no,
the two are intertwined, aren't they? Though I mean, in the sense that
to me,
if the idea is that overzealous policing, that it has a cost and a benefit, right? Overzealous policing has a cost and a benefit. The cost is obviously to the people who are the victims of the overzealous policing.
Absolutely, no. You guys, you often talk about black incompetency, and I've always heard this. Oh, blacks, when you did affirmative action, you're going to have all these incompetent blacks all over the place. Now, nobody ever talks about white policing as incompetent. And I'm telling you, a lot of this policing is bloody incompetent. I'm like, oh my God, were you trained? Did you ever go to school?
I don't think it's unique to white police.
No. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that nobody ever talks about incompetence on policing as a problem. It becomes racialized, and nobody says this is incompetent policing. Full stop. Nobody says this.
By the way,
and I hear this all the time, and everybody comes out, and nobody will come out and say, I don't care if he's black or white, that guy was incompetent. And he did not deserve that job. And you bring these people into a community, and we have to suffer incompetent policing.
Actually, so
and then you come out and
Charles,
okay.
no, I totally
let me interject. I can see Monique would like to interject.
No, it's all right. I mean, you talk about incompetent policing, nobody talks about the fact that, yes, is there police profiling? Absolutely. But you know who started that was my great-grandmother in East LA, the darkest Mexican woman you could find. And did you know what she did? She invited Officer O'Reilly to her front porch of a dirt front yard that she swept every day and taught him what the red do-rag meant and what the blue do-rag meant. Officer O'Reilly had no idea. So has it evolved into incompetent policing? You know, I think it's more of a matter of the fact that, you know, unity in the community is what keeps our families together. As a Mexican-American female who's raised 4 sons, okay, 4 sons, and taught them all that the first time you're arrested, you're on your own, okay, because I have no tolerance for that. 0 tolerance for that. You're on your own. And I'll tell you what, my sons were never police profiled in the library, at mass, or at the church youth group. They were never police, you know, racially profiled there, and that was a true thing. But I have to tell you that the incompetence, is it there? Sure, it's there. But when you look at the Baltimore Police Department or the Baltimore mayor, they're black. Okay, so the incompetence does transcend the color of their skin, and it can transcend some of that incompetency. However, I would like to point out that the first officers that came into East Los Angeles to help my great-grandmother, they didn't know what a do-rag was. They didn't know what the creased khakis were or the word cholo was. We taught them that. When I say we, I mean the Mexican-American community, because we were scared, very scared of the drug dealers that would threaten us, that would wait outside mass and hit up the old ladies for money to protect them. So I have to say thank you to our policemen and women. And, you know, I can't believe that an Officer O'Reilly, an Irish officer of the law, would even know that if we didn't invite them into our communities and say, we need help. And that's where we're at today.
Now,
I gotta jump in.
during the Ferguson,
I wanna catch on that, because I also have sons. But the difference is that my boys will be profiled when they're coming out of church. The difference is my children will be profiled when they're leaving or sitting inside of a library. Those are the types of instances that I'm fighting for. I want to make certain that someone who's got a big afro doesn't seem too radical, like she's going to commit some type of crime. I want to be able to change the look of someone who's walking down the street wearing a hoodie, that they don't become a suspect, that they're up to no good. I want to make certain that someone who listens to hip hop, it doesn't take much to be able to profile someone. Oh, that person's one of them. It doesn't take us much to create those definitions.
I'm
And
so
so
glad,
unless we're
you
able
know,
to do that,
I'm really glad you
just a
said
second.
that.
Let me interject a question
Sure.
here, because there is a question about sons. Because
Sure.
Charles Medady wrote a column recently about sons. He wrote about Toya Graham, the mother who is now being hailed as Mother of the Year because she was smacking her son numerous times
I've done that.
to herd him away from the rioters in Baltimore. And Charles, you wrote on the Stranger blog, quote, "I'm a father who worries about keeping my own black kids alive. The smacking is not an act of moral outrage, but an act of desperation. She rightly feels that her society places a very low value on men who look like her son. She does not want to end up like the parents of Freddie Gray or Michael Brown." With the scale of public outrage and acclaim for her actions, why do you believe society doesn't value those who look like her son?
You know,
Just Charles directly, because it's his call.
okay, guys. All right, I have to say this really, really. I mean, I'm a pragmatist. I'm not kidding you. I really want to. I don't like emotional. You know what I mean? I really like to say, what are the facts telling you, right? Fear. What's that? Fear. Yeah, no. So basically, in the 1970s, around 1972, basically you had a prison population in the USA of roughly, I think it was just under 100,000, right? With a population of 200 million people. And now you have a prison population in the USA of basically, in 40 years, you have a prison population that's around 2 million people. And a lot of those in prison are black, right? And so how in the world did it between 1925 and 1972, the prison population was pretty stable, right? And then suddenly it explodes in 1972, and we have a huge prison population today. Is this Darwinian selection? I mean, really, if you tell me Darwin works that fast, then yeah, let's talk about that. You know, because maybe there's an issue like the Finches here in the Galapagos Islands, right? You know, black kids are just like, crime that fast, and it exploded. I just want you to be really practical about this. And if you tell me that those figures are not strange, right? And do not speak of a fundamental shift in the society that is not to do with biology or race, meaning race in the sense of biology and genetics, then you have to come to conclude that there was a cultural shift here. You have to come to conclude this. And in that sense, you have to say that the people are being incarcerated in the society and policed in a way that is now that if you're not sensible, if you're not really practical about it, you have to say you have to either go in the defense to protect your children, right? Or you have to be ignore the issues and act like that this doesn't exist. But I can't believe that suddenly a lot of black males in the space of 40 years became suddenly criminals that you could just throw into jail
Charles,
in that space of time.
I'd like
behavior-
to try and get one really concise.
I'm just saying that that's
Just a
all. I'm
second.
not-
I'd like to get a concise answer from both of you on what exactly do you fear for your sons? Just a concise, maybe a
Well-
sentence or two, and then I'd like Ben and Monique to respond so we can narrow it down.
Look. I was brought up in a household, and I was middle class. I didn't grow up in a poor household, and my parents were educated and so forth and so on. And I grew up being told that basically that you really have to be careful about white people, and you have to be careful about how you present yourself with police officers. You have to be careful about all these things. We had sober conversations in our house. Because for us, it was just like, this person or that person got hurt or that person ended up in jail, and you don't want to be in that situation. So basically, there was a lot of like this kind of sober talk, and I had to have this conversation with my own son and say, don't kid yourself. If a police officer comes, remember that they're seeing a black person. Just be aware of that.
Dr. Seacrest?
I recall looking at the video of the desperate mother who probably in her eyes was slapping her son to try to save her life, the desperation of that moment. And I had to reflect on what my parents before her probably had to feel in that same type of desperation. You see, you've got to go into the history when you're talking about African Americans here inside of the United States. We've got to look at the stories of our grandparents having to teach, don't look a white person inside of their eyes, make certain that you look down. Those old lessons that were taught to children and the importance of what took place if they ever were to disobey that rule. The consequences for us could cost our lives. And so I try to take myself back into those moments when, as a parent, you don't want to see your child forget what those rules are. You don't want to see your child put himself inside of harm's way. I look at that video and I can see a mother who's desperate, trying to fear of if an officer catches you in this type of climate, he may give you a warning. That would be on a good day. But we also know the consequences of that could cost you his life. So I've seen the desperation of that. I know the historical significance of how our parents would try to make sure don't mess up, don't break the rules, because there's thousands of written rules, and then for us, there's the unwritten rules.
Do you think the unwritten rules are the same now as they were in the time of your grandparents? Because you're saying
Absolutely.
Really?
My son, let me tell you why. Absolutely. The unwritten rules, we have to make certain that we're teaching our children. I recall dropping off my son to college last fall, and as I'm going through, he's studying pre-med at Wazoo. Any parent would be proud. I'm still telling this bright and gifted kid, baby boy, if you get pulled over, make certain that you listen to the letter of whatever the officer's saying. I don't care how rude he's being. You say, yes, sir, the entire time. Baby boy, don't touch your cell phone. Before you reach for your registration, make certain you let the officer know what you're going to do before you remove your hands from the wheels. Those lessons come from our grandparents, but it's understanding.
Those aren't the same lessons as 80
Those
years
are the-
ago.
those are
the
definitely.
lessons of 80 years ago were significantly more strict than tell the cops before you reach for your red. I mean, if those are the same rules, then my parents told me, and I'm pretty white. You know, so it's. I mean, I'm not suggesting that young black men don't get a different look from a lot of cops. I'm not suggesting that at all. What I am suggesting is that the rules have changed pretty significantly, and if we're going to act like the cops treat young black men now the way that they did 50 years ago, that's just it's a slander on cops.
I believe that they do.
Really?
I believe that the police brutality, the movement of the Black Lives Matter, that didn't just surface all of a sudden, where
The
in the
statistics
last
don't
few
bear it out.
years that
I
officers
can
just
assure
suddenly
you-
started.
I can
This has
assure
been a
you-
history.
I can assure you Black Lives Matter and the hashtag are coming up very shortly. Let's hear really quickly from Monique about
Great,
parenting.
thank you.
Yeah.
So I think I have 4 sons and 2 daughters. My 4 sons are 26, 21, 21, and 13. One of my sons, Buddy, is 21 years old, and if he ever hears me talk about him, he'll just like die. But I remember very specifically, him going through his teenage years, and I find out at 17 years old he has the AK-47 tattooed on his stomach. And I'm going, what the hell is going on here? And pretty soon he's gonna join a gang. And you know what I said to him? Well, you know what happens when you join a gang? You get jumped in. And he said, yeah. And I slapped him square in the face with my hand. Because I said, you want to get jumped in? I'm going to jump you in right now, okay? It's ridiculous for you to walk around with 2 parents that own a business acting like you want thug life in the middle of your stomach. So what do I fear for my son? I fear for my son that he will not learn the value of hard work, that it's not worth it to him to get $9 an hour minimum wage because he's going to get 15 now and decides to sell drugs instead for the quick dollar. That's what I worry about for my sons, that the streets will swallow him up. And I see that now with kids protesting for $15 an hour now. I started at $4.23 an hour as a busser. I now have a business with 4 walls and 60 employees. It didn't happen overnight. It happened for me cleaning toilets, cleaning up throw up, learning as much as I could and saying, if I want to earn more money, I need to get the next job. So what do I worry about for my son? I worry about his entire generation of iPads and iPhones that they don't know the value of patience and hard work. They don't know the value of experiential equity because they get it right now. I'm going to go protest and get $15 tomorrow. No, the hell you're not. You're going to learn your job, you're going to build some equity, and you're going to give your boss a return on investment. So what do I worry about? That he won't ever get that.
Let me assure you as well, we'll be approaching the minimum wage coming up too.
Yeah, I'm sure we will.
David, I do have a quick comment. I do have a quick comment about the mother and the kind of media-wide worship for this mother who's in public slapping the living crap out of her kid.
With an open hand.
With an open hand. My question is not about that particular incident. My question is why her son is on the street in the first place throwing rocks at police. Because
you were never
well,
a teenager? You were never a teenager.
I was
in your
never a
life?
teenager who threw rocks at the cops.
let me interrupt you both because I'm quite sure that this conversation will.
I'm sorry. I like
Charles,
I,
just
I like,
Charles,
hold on.
I like a good teenager.
Charles, let me
hold on one
assure you.
second.
Let me assure you that your answers to the following question will then head into Ben's direction here. And because I spend hours for these events preparing, I like to insert myself from time to time just to pretend I exist.
That's
So-
why they picked the tallest man in the room to moderate.
That's right. This is why everybody else on that side of the room, and then there's me. So I wanted to get a short answer from each of you. I'm going to use my stopwatch because everybody seems to have a different definition of short. So in 30 seconds or less, we'll start with Monique and work our way down this way. I want to know this. In the aftermath of the as yet unexplained death of Freddie Gray, Baltimore obviously suffered a great deal in riots. Some are calling the riots a cry for justice, something you get when you deny people a voice. Others say it's opportunistic criminality. You might say it's something else. What do you think these riots represent? 30 seconds or less.
I know that problems of the future are not best served. Did I do that? Sorry. Problems of the future are not best served by solutions of the past. So, Thurgood Marshall, who was chief counsel for the NAACP, grew up just 2 blocks from there. And you know what path he chose? Not rioting, not picketing. not stealing wheat thins from the CVS. He chose the path of legality to change the course of his people through Brown versus the Board of Education. So what do I think those riots are? I think the depravity, I think they're thugs, and I think if you really want to make a difference, Thurgood Marshall, who grew up just 2 blocks from there, did such a thing, who was a contemporary of Martin Luther King.
Now I'd like to skip over to Dr. Seacrest.
I look at the Baltimore uprisings as more than just riots, right? I hate the idea when you say thugs and riots, right? White people riot as well. When y'all win Super Bowls 2 years in a row, y'all get off the hook. Don't make it seem like it's just Baltimore getting upset. So my 30-second answer is I feel the frustration of what's happening in the community, and I think it's a symptom. The uprisings are a symptom of a pressure that's been unaddressed for too long.
Ben.
I'm offended by the language of uprising applied to people who are breaking into other black people's stores and looting them. This is a lack of values. And people who are destroying private property, destroying cop cars, in an uprising against what exactly? Against the black police chief, against a mostly minority police force, against the black mayor, against the black president, against the black attorney general, against against a city council that is 9 of 15 are black and all 15 are elected Democrats. What is the uprising against? What is it seeking to achieve? I still don't see what exactly the riots are seeking to achieve. Bottom line is, this is all, it all could be boiled down to just act like a mensch. Act like a human being. Honestly, it's not useful to riot, it's not useful to break things, it's not useful to throw rocks at people. And the idea that we're supposed to sort of correlate your level of outrage.
Let's hold off on the idea. I'm going to stick to the 30 seconds on
yeah,
this
the last
one. Charles?
sentence. The last sentence.
Yeah.
The idea that we're supposed to correlate your level of outrage with a certain level of justification. In other words, the more outraged you are and the more angry you are, the more justified you must be, is absolute nonsense.
Yeah. I personally don't care. It's a riot for me. What? Yeah, they robbed, they threw stones and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm not going to I don't like going into that argument, because you end up with avoiding again. You end up where Ben can just chop you down really quickly, right? Because you're like everybody sort of forgets. I mean, yeah, they're rioting. Yeah, they're looting. What the hell is that? That is exactly what they're doing. You know, and I don't want to end up like arguing over what they're doing is rioting or not, because I end up stuck in that argument. I want to understand why that riot started. That's what I'm more interested in. You know what I mean? I want to know exactly why would anybody get there? Because that's another discussion and along the lines. And you know, again, I want to just say this very quickly. I know it's got a few minutes. I'll just say this. Yeah.
You're also redefining,
So what?
You're also redefining
so what?
30 seconds
So
for Charles.
Michael Brown is 18 years old, and he may have charged a police officer, right? Yeah. Maybe it was a bad decision. After all, he is, remember, 18 years old. I mean, everybody acts like 18-year-olds make great decisions all through their bloody lives. I mean, I'm always stunned.
Charles, allow me to
So the question would
exercise
be,
my divine right of interruption
a young
here.
black male,
Charles,
why can a young black male
Charles,
be
moderator
allowed
has
to
a
make
position,
a
job here. Everybody's got to play by the same rules here on this panel. So just like I'm interrupting Ben, that was a good minute and 30 seconds of the 30 seconds here.
Sorry, you said we work at our own time. I'm working African time.
I want to point something else.
I want to tell you, 30 seconds.
I want to point out something else, which is, do you know that the ladies know how to keep time? All right. Let me do a follow-up question. This one is directed at Ben and Monique, and we're going to move into income, and I'm sure we're going to revisit Baltimore and Ferguson here in a couple of minutes. But I wanted to start with this. I got an email from Pastor Wayne Perryman, and it was about a different topic, but he brought up a number of things that I wanted to share with you. According to Pew Research, the net worth of white families in 2013 was $141,000. For black families, it was $11,000. Even less than the $19,000 it was in 2007. According to economist Edward Wolf of the University of New York, excluding vehicles and other durables, the median black family worth is just $1,700, while 40% of black families have zero or negative wealth. White family worth in terms of financial worth is 69 times more than that of black families. Given this disparity, how can you argue that racism is not a driving factor in income inequality?
Because it has nothing to do with race and everything to do with culture. And when you have a culture that doesn't, and when, you know what? Explain to me. You explain to me why black kids aren't graduating high school. Explain that one to me. Explain to me why black kids are shooting each other in rates significantly higher than whites are shooting each other. Explain to me why 13% of the population is responsible for 50% of the murder. Explain to me why the number of black kids in prison, not for innocent reasons, not for walking down the street and getting pulled into a prison, is so high. Explain, if it has nothing to do with culture, explain to me why the single motherhood rate in the black community jumped from 20% to 70% in the same course of time that the civil rights movement has made such tremendous strides. Is America more racist now than it was in 1960? And if it is, please explain to me how that happened.
Anybody
Well-
can jump in. It's an open mic there.
So I would need to ask, have any of you ever been on food stamps? Have any of you ever applied for welfare? I have, and I've been on WIC, Women, Infant, Children, and I'll tell you why there's such a disparity. As a single mother at 17 years old, as a Hispanic female, I was told by my Democratic-led city council of all the programs I could be on, but you can't own a car, and you can't have property, because if you do, you're cut off. So you know what I was encouraged to do? Get on as many of those programs as possible. We become dependent, suckling pigs of the government as minorities. And it's why I voted Democrat, because they're gonna give me women, infant, children. I'm gonna get food stamps until the day that I stood in line and my son wanted fruit snacks and I couldn't get them. You know why? My women, infant, children only covered Kix, cheese, and eggs. And you know what I said? If I want something different, I better make my own goddamn money. And I'm gonna tell you something. In Baltimore, when you look at a city, these urban hubs, these urban cities like Baltimore, like Atlanta, like Dallas, they're all run by not just Democrats, liberal, progressive Democrats who love to get the vote by saying, we're gonna take care of you, let us take care of you. That is pandering, that's pandering to me. I can take care of myself if you give me the opportunity. Don't tell me that I can't own a car, because I will own a car. So why is there disparity? Because the day that you have a car that's over the value of $3,000, your kids get cut off a free lunch. That's the reason why there's disparity.
Let's make sure all language stays radio friendly.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
thank you. Gosh darn
Now,
it.
moments ago, both of you were about ready to jump out of your seats, and this is unusual for me because usually that means words will follow, but there was a pause. I want to give you this opportunity to.
Well, Lent is
fire back.
over, so let me cross my.
When we're talking about the wealth gap, I have so many responses. We'll just take the easy ones. I'll go for the low-hanging fruit, and we'll talk about some of the systemic barriers. What keeps people of color by race poor? What are some of the barriers systemically that are in place? Let's talk about something just recently, right? We all remember the housing foreclosure crisis where we had a court that had found that banks were 3 times as likely to give a bad loan, right? The adjustable rate mortgages than a fixed home, and the cultural types of ways that black folks invest versus white folks, how we put our money investments inside of homes. So when those homes don't give us equity, when they don't become an asset for us, the destructive nature of what it means for our wealth. All of those things are simple to kind of look inside of a report we don't have to debate on. We're talking about the systemic measures that keep people poor. We're talking about things like the Homestead Act, where both black soldiers, white soldiers, both fought for their country valiantly, laid their lives on the line. Those who were able to get the GI Bill, those who were not able to get a GI Bill. Those types of systems that are created by the color of one's skin, who gets to take advantage of those systems and who gets left out and are marginalized. Those create the wealth gaps that we see. It's not a matter of just
What in the last
wanting
50 years,
to
though?
work hard. Well, then we'll take the home ownership. That was devastating. When you see a greater divide between black wealth and white wealth in this last decade, it was because of the barriers, the unfair lending practices by the banks. That's how come they lost on that lawsuit. Those are the types of things that create the biggest gaps in wealth disparities.
Do you really think there was collusion between all of the banks not to lend money to black people who are qualified to get the loans? Are banks in the business of racism?
Absolutely. Here's the reason
Please.
why, and this is the reason why there were settlement checks. This is why the Washington State Attorney General's office is still handling those. Yes.
Please name the individual bankers who are racist
Bank
so
of
we can all call them out.
America is known, and they lost their suit because they actually called people who looked like me, Latino women and men who walked inside, mud people.
The last time I saw a FICO credit score, I didn't see American, Hispanic, or Chinese next to it. I didn't. TransUnion, Expedia, or any of the 3 credit bureaus. There's a number that shows your credit worthiness. And my last name's Trudanowski. I'm sorry, my hair's straight and I'm not ethnic enough. But the last time I checked, my home loan was not measured against the color of my skin or how tan I am or not.
Then check your Attorney General's office, and you will see that there's still settlement checks by those banks because of their unfair lending practices.
But you're saying that there
took
would have to be,
place.
you understand there would have to be industry-wide collusion to make that happen. So you're suggesting that all the banks are Bank of America.
You know, white people don't know when they're jacked. And it's really something that you guys got to learn. When you're getting stiffed and jacked by the banks. And it's not a matter of like whether the banks are racist or not. It's whether they're going to make whether they're going to fleece you or not. A lot of times, and this is in St. Louis, and this is in several neighborhoods, what they would do is they would actually raise the cost of the value of homes that white people were owned by threatening that blacks were coming in, right, and that your house would be devalued. No, don't ever, when you wonder like, oh, is this thing like, did this thing that the banks are doing, is it that they're racist or not? No. Wonder how are they going to fleece you? And they will. No, and everybody's got to realize, when they will use anything to fleece you. And to me, it's not an issue of like, of whether you could say like, that blacks were receiving loans or not. My question is, why in the world wouldn't you give a black person a loan? I mean, and instead, and you find out often there was a great deal of advantage for not doing so. And there's a lot of money to be made by those kinds of discriminatory practices. I'm sorry, I'm a very economic person. Believe me, I know capitalists want to make money. And so I do accept. And my
Charles,
question
the
is,
banks almost went bankrupt because of the subprime crisis.
No. The subprime crisis was a real bunch of nonsense. And so basically, what happened is the banks were running out of people to make money off in the ordinary system, and so they had to like switch to poor people who had nothing and give them home loans. They actually switched those home loans and securitized them and sold those securities on Wall Street, and they overvalued them. And then they said, finally, when sort of caught up, and suddenly people had to actually pay for this stuff, right, which they couldn't afford, then suddenly the entire system crashed because they had all these bad securities on their hands.
Right.
No. My question is, I'm not going to say that.
No, yeah, this is a good explanation, but I'm just wondering what the point is.
I mean, are you crazy? You listen. You're talking about securitizing.
I understand what credit default swap is. I just don't understand your point. I mean, if your point is that banks made terrible decisions.
Decisions? No, they made a lot of money. I don't.
Before they went
and we bailed them out on it. No, we bailed them out. They made some bad decisions.
You're right.
We live in an age where banks are allowed to make lousy decisions and not pay for it.
I agree with you. No bailouts.
The problem.
Welcome to the Republican Party, Charles.
No. But no, that's not how it works. We have to pay for their bad investments.
But the problem is people that make $11,000 don't have securities. They have a SNAP card that they use. And so if you want to talk about income disparity, let's talk about that. But the FDIC, they say FDI what? I mean, that's really the problem. If you have someone making $11,000 a year, they're not being a victim of the FDIC or low securities. They're being pressed down by government that wants them suckling at the teat. That's what it's about.
This is follow up on the same general topic. I'll direct it to Monique since she's got the mic. According to the ACLU, a 2010 report found 69% of the people sued by debt buyers, people who are buying debt, were black or Latino, and 66% of meritless cases were brought against black or Latino clients. Are debt collection practices also proof of racial injustice that needs government repair?
No, because in order to get debt, you have to have something to loan against. So if you have an asset, that's simple economics. You have to have an asset or some set of collateral, correct? So in order to get that asset, whether it's your Audi 5000 or BMW you can't afford, you have to have credit worthiness and the ability to get that. That's bad choices. You know, as a single mother, as someone that started as a busser, I learned bad choices. If I made a choice to not pay my rent and instead go out to a club or do something like that, I made a bad choice and I should be held in consequence of that. In 2015, very few people are held in consequence of that. Very few. And I think it's a lesson that needs to be enforced even more. So if you have an ability to have collateral or you have ownership and now the debt collectors are coming after you, shame on you for not having integrity and best practices. If you sign a contract with someone, whether it's for an exchange of goods or services, for this amount of money, I will do this service for you. I'll provide you with a hot meal. I will wash your car. I will do your lawn. That is a contractual obligation. There's nothing wrong with that. The same thing with credit worthiness. If you sign a contractual obligation saying, I'm credit worthy, I will make these payments on time, I don't care what the color of your skin is purple, you were, didn't abide by that contract. So no, I think that is not true.
No jumping in?
What?
I think I need some
I was
coffee.
being polite. I was like, no. I did not.
Wait, this is one for the record books. The strangers being polite? What's happened over there?
Yeah. No, yeah.
I feel like I've had a strong influence over there already.
No, oh, shoot. There's so much stuff.
Careful,
that
Dan Savage is going to fire you.
Yeah. No. I mean, you have to really get it. Look, I don't come from a. I don't. Everybody needs to understand that I don't come from a family that was poor. I wasn't poor. Wasn't raised poor. My parents were educated. We lived in a really nice neighborhood, and so forth and so on. I'm not coming here to plea on the ground of a background that was harmed and where white people were beating up on me and so forth and so on. No, actually, I didn't have this thing. I actually grew up in a world where, I was sheltered, quite simply so. And so, I mean, when I'm making these judgments, it's not from a personal experience. It's actually from looking at the way the world works, right? And I'm just saying that if you were to say, from my perspective, that young men, that they're black, and that there's no racism and all this stuff, I make this call. Yes, I'm black, but I make this call not from a position of experience. I actually make this call from the position of saying the facts seem to look like this. I'm sorry. Yes, the banks have the loans and so forth and so on, and the discrimination.
Let me ask
is
a
real.
follow-up for both of you then, since the issue of disparity has come up a number of times. When does disparity not indicate racism?
Level of effort.
Statistical disparity. For example, overwhelmingly men commit crimes more than women, but we don't say that the Justice Department is sexist. So, is there a line that you draw for yourself, or is there some way that you interpret statistical disparity and you determine that is not a racial disparity, it's something else? Well, we can return to it. That's okay too. Ben, do you want to?
Yes. It's called evidence of racism. When there is no evidence of racism, it's probably not racism. When there is actual evidence of racism, it's probably racism. And the fact that everybody jumps from there's inequality and therefore there is inequity, just because there's inequality does not mean there was inequity.
But there has to be racism. You can't say there's no racism.
Without evidence?
No. I'm just saying that I don't know which animal. Maybe we're talking about
saying it's
dogs
racist.
or something. I'm talking about human beings, and I'm like, human beings are most likely going to have racial prejudices. I'm just so sorry. I'm just so sorry. I don't know. I don't come from. I come from planet Earth.
Charles, I want to ask you a question. So your default is that when there is no evidence, racism is the deciding factor. That is your default.
No, I was not saying that. I'm just saying that you're going to have sexists, you're going to have racists, you're going to have all this stuff. I mean, I'm just saying that.
I agree it exists, but the problem that I'm seeing, and this is the problem with the general conversation, is that there's no solution in simply saying there's racism out there. How does that solve anything? I mean, when you talk about there's institutional racism, what does that mean? Show me a law that is racist in intent, and we will agree. Show me a police officer who commits a racist act like we saw in South Carolina, right, where a police officer shot a black man running away and it was obviously unjustified, and I will agree. But you need, the idea that you can craft a narrative based on no racism because it just must be somewhere out there in the ether, that doesn't solve problems for anybody and creates more problems for people because now they grow up in a milieu and an environment where they are told that every obstacle they face is from some shadowy, nameless, faceless group who is out to get them simply because of the color of their skin. They'll never succeed in that environment.
You know, the weirdest thing is that actually in the black home, as I experienced it, really, there is no discussion of racism. Racism actually is a discussion that you actually come out and you face in the public because it's a real thing that you have to actually expect. I mean, you're silly and you're foolish if you don't really think that that's going to be there and encountered in the real world. I'm sorry, this is just a fact of life. But if I'm at home and having dinner with my father or whatever, we don't go, oh my God, this society is so racist as I'm eating my steak, and you know what I mean? Oh goodness gracious! Oh, I can't bear it. My black skin's causing. I mean, no, we don't
it
talk
depends
like
who burns
that.
the steak.
Actually, we don't talk like that. We talk about, my God, Aunt, what's her name? Oh my God, she's got to take some pills because she's off the register. I mean, it's just like, these are the conversations we have at home. We don't have these kinds of conversations that we're having right now. At least in my childhood, we didn't have them. And I'm watching the people I knew growing up in the black neighborhood, I didn't hear anybody really talking about race when we were at the dinner table. I mean, it just didn't really pop up, unless it was an issue, it was on television, but mostly it was about family and regular life.
But I disagree. I have to tell you, even in my culture, there is an underlying racism. And I know that the panel today, and especially with what's going on in America, we're talking about white on black. But I cannot wake up in the morning and not think about, intercultural racism, okay? I'm not Mexican enough. Why? Because I'm articulate and because I have straight hair and I can wear high heels. I don't have a tattoo on my neck. Yes, there is a huge problem with racism no matter if you're light-skinned or dark-skinned. Absolutely, there is intercultural racism. It's absolutely underlying. And why you may not talk about it, your grandmother will have the favorite grandkid. If she's the lightest one with the good hair, that becomes the favorite grandkid in our culture. And that's, unfortunately, even within our own cultures, we tend to look upon, the color of each other's skin and how much education we have. And if my uncle has done time in jail, which, he has, then he becomes more Mexican than I am. What is up with that? I mean, it's sad, but it's true. It's absolutely true. It's like I can't eat spicy picante sauce, so I'm not Mexican enough. It's true, in every culture, whether it's Asian, black, Mexican, there is, while you may not have grown up talking about it over your, tea and toast.
I mean, in my
it's
family,
there.
if you're not a doctor or a lawyer, you're not Jewish
You're not
enough.
Jewish enough. It's true.
That part is true. This entire time, I've been trying to think about your initial question about disparities. Are they automatically tied to race? And at first, I think all of us were stumped because we were trying to think of the instances. I do agree that they are separate, that they don't necessarily correlate within itself. There are disparities. NAACP, we are the experts inside of the nation of bringing in the racial lens for all of the work. No, they're not necessarily going hand in hand, or they're not necessarily tied to each other. So that's how I would answer it. No, they don't have to go together. My job as a civil rights attorney is to be able to make you see race at every given opportunity, but no, it's not present in each and every single disparity. To your second
What are the standards? What are the standards of the difference? I mean, you said that you want people to see race in every single issue.
Where
what
it's
are the
present. Where it's present.
Okay,
So
so
for instance, if we're
what's your
talking-
standard as to where it's present?
Absolutely. What's my, take something as simple as if we're talking about a disparity, say men and women. My job would be to show what does that look like when you have women from a different group, communities of color. What does it look like when we're talking about a woman who's working or stuck in a minimum wage job, not as a starter, but for her career?
Right, no, I guess the
What does
question I'm
that look
asking
like?
more
And so we
specifically-
bring in the racial dynamic of
Right.
how that affects.
No, I understand that. The question that I'm asking is, when do you decide something racist has occurred?
Racist?
Yes. When can you decide that an act of racism has occurred? Because if you have just a statistical disparity, has an act of racism automatically occurred? That was David's basic question, I think.
Right. There's obviously there might be there will be a disparate impact on different groups of people. That doesn't necessarily mean, I think what you're saying is, doesn't necessarily mean something racist is going on, even though there's a racial impact. So the question was about where do you draw the line between something that might have a racial impact but is not inherently racist. Yeah. Let me move on, and if you want to come back to that, that's fine at some other point. But you had mentioned, Dr. Seacrest, that you had mentioned that we have to go back to history. So this is what I want to challenge Ben on history. On your show, Ben, you said that you believe the 1964 Civil Rights Act was flawed. How is that different from telling black Americans that they should have to continue enduring the endless indignities of racial discrimination and segregation that a war and constitutional amendment could not change?
Okay, so when I talked about the Civil Rights Act of 64, what I said was flawed about the Civil Rights Act of 64 was not 8 of the 10 titles that talk about what the government can and cannot do. What I said was flawed is the government forcing private business owners into doing things. Because Jim Crow was the government forcing private owners into doing things. Jim Crow was not an informal regime of private business owners doing things. It was actual laws on the books forcing businesses to discriminate against people. I mean, you can look up the Jim Crow laws. They were statutory. They were present in the South. The point that I was making is that it's a very dangerous precedent once you start saying that the government gets to dictate how you run your business, especially given the fact that capitalism does take care of this problem in the sense that the only color that matters under capitalism is basically green. And because the only color that matters is green, if you discriminate against someone in your business, this is why Jim Crow laws were actually imposed in the first place. If you look at the history, the reason the Jim Crow laws were enforced in the first place in the South, and they didn't take place in other parts of the country, the reason Jim Crow laws were necessary is because they tried to set up an informal regime of discrimination against blacks, and that didn't work because business owners were cheating because they wanted to get black people's money. And so what happened is that the government came in and they said, okay, no longer can you do this. And the Civil Rights Act, instead of saying, okay, get rid of the Jim Crow laws, which of course is totally appropriate, and those were unconstitutional to begin with under the 14th Amendment, instead of just doing that, the government went to the extreme of, now we are going to dictate what you do with your business. Now, I may very well agree that people, and I do agree, in fact, that people who discriminate against black folks in their business are evil and wrong and nasty and deserve to be boycotted and put out of business. I agree with all of that. I just don't agree with the fundamental principle that the government gets to tell you what you can and cannot do with your business for the same reason that I think there's freedom of association. I think black historical colleges should be allowed to be black historical colleges if they want to be, and they shouldn't be forced to admit white people if they don't want to.
Would either of you like to weigh in? No?
I know, there is so much to that. There's so much. You know how in your gut, everything, when someone's talking, it's just like hurting and in knots, and so that's what happens when you say this. It's all up in here.
I actually carry around a bottle of Pepto-Bismol if you're interested.
The night,
Where's the wine?
That's a different Jew.
That was funny.
oh boy. The notion of whether or not government went too far, intruded the private rights of a business by stating the do's and don'ts as far as the discrimination practices. Your
Right.
argument is that that went too far.
Yes, my
A
argument
private
is that,
right.
Yes, that private businesses should be able to run how private businesses want to run because that's called freedom of association.
The idea and the spirit under the law,
Is something with which I agree, which is that it is bad to discriminate against people. I just don't think that it's the government's job to enforce against freedom of
those
association.
basic. And that's,
so during
oh,
World-
now you want to jump in. I gave you the opportunity. Go ahead.
So during World War II, somebody wanted to sell arms to the Germans. That was cool, right?
That's a national security threat and was illegal for a reason. That's not freedom of
Oh,
association.
so but what is now we have qualifications? Okay.
No. No, it's called an externality to a relationship. There are no externalities to a relationship where you come into my business and I say, I'm not serving you. It's you and me, and a consensual transaction has not taken place. If I sell you a nuclear weapon, there are probably going to be ramifications to me selling you a nuclear weapon.
I actually do believe in the government. I'm sorry, I want to finish just this thought. I'll use my 30 seconds. I actually do believe in the government helping us to get to where we know we need to be. Let's take gender equality right now. Hear me out, hear me out. I am for the wage equality between men and women, that the government has taken that arm, that role of trying to push us up to where we need to be. I don't believe that just given its own, because it's the right thing to do, that folks will do the right thing. I believe that there is that push to take us out of our comfort zone, especially when it comes to discrimination, not just on race, but also on gender, also on sexuality. I think those affirmative, deliberate steps and protections by the government is a good thing.
Well, it's competition. That's why competition is there. I mean, really, this is why competition is there. Competition is designed to do this. I mean, if I could hire nobody but women at 77 cents on the dollar to do the exact same work as men, and everybody else were stupid enough not to hire any of the women, I'd be the richest man in America.
You feel that stomach thing too, see? Go ahead.
I mean, I love these potential worlds. I mean, it's true. I mean, I really would love to see that world go into place, but it doesn't happen. I'm just...
It does, though. And according to Time Magazine 2010, in the 50 biggest cities in America, women with the exact same educational levels, time in the workforce, number of children, they earn 104% of what men do, according to Time Magazine. You're comparing apples to oranges.
So I'm just saying that, and again, it's just a really, I mean, it's really, I'm sorry, it's just like, I mean, for the longest time, it was a really big issue here in Europe, and here in USA and in Europe about child labor laws. Now, basically, I could also make a ton of money if I got a bunch of kids that do, a bunch of operations, and use them up between basically the ages of like 14 and 18, and I could make a ton of money. I mean, and why shouldn't I be allowed to do that?
Because they're not capable of full consent. That's the difference between a minor and a major.
Oh, so another qualification. Okay, all right, okay.
No, Charles, I can't enter into any contractual relationship of any kind with a 5-year-old.
I call sell nuclear bombs to Hitler. I call exploit children. Okay.
I'm sorry to limit you like this, Charles.
What are you giving me?
I'm ruining your life here. You can't sell nukes to people. You can't exploit 5-year-olds. I mean, boy, I'm really rough around here.
My point is that regulations and qualifications are necessary.
Right, I'm not an anarchist.
Yeah.
I'm a libertarian. There's a difference.
No.
We've got about 15 minutes to go, and I have a number of questions I have to get to, in part
How
because
many minutes?
In part, 15.
Sorry,
everybody. Flew by.
In part because
I'm
I
not even
promised that I would get to them.
Well, time flies when you won't shut up.
However, this question is not one of them. This is for Dr. Seacrest. Martin Luther King said he had a dream that one day we'll be judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. Yet yesterday, King 5 aired a report about how the NAACP confronted the Tukwila School Board for being too white. The local NAACP president, Gerald Hankerson, said, quote, "You don't even look like the kids that go to this school. You don't even speak their language. Why is the color of the people serving on the school board relevant?"
Absolutely. That's my president. So what he had said there, Tukwila is actually one of the first states in this area that actually reached the minority majority, meaning there's more people of color living inside of that city than there are white people. He was talking about inside of the schools, you still have the opposite, where the teachers, the principals, the upper staff, they aren't sitting with the students who are inside of their classrooms. There's that cultural difference. When you see a child, are you able to recognize his brilliance, his giftedness, because he talks differently? Those were the concerns of the NAACP. So when we turned to the superintendent then and apprised them of that problem, we were told, yes, this isn't, we're not hiring teachers of color, the staff that we need to at the rate that we should. It's good, but it's not great, was her response. And so the frustration was, one, you're aware of the disparities in learning that's happening inside of that school district. You're aware that teachers of color can reach those children because of that cultural identification where the child can see themselves, where the teacher can understand the student. That significance, it hasn't been met up. So that's where that came from.
But wasn't that was that quote in regards to the teachers or regard to the school board?
Both.
Both. So I want to remember that the people of color voted for the school board, and they voted to elect those people. I don't know, maybe they had more yard signs. So my challenge back would be then run. Then run. If you want to change it, that is the Thurgood Marshall vein of changing from within. Then run for school board.
What about the staff? I hear you what you're saying. We have to, and I agree, we have to get more, as a person who ran for state senate, I do believe we need to get more people of color into politics.
But
So I agree with you on that. But I'd love to hear one, not you, Ben.
Sure.
I'd love to hear that same argument when we're talking about the staff. That's something that doesn't need to run for election. What are your thoughts
Call
on
the
that?
WEA on that one. I'd love to hear that.
Well,
That's what I'd love to say.
The question that I was going to ask, though, is it's not any person of color, I assume. I mean, if they decided they were going to staff the school board, for example, with Ward Connerly and Thomas Sowell and Condoleezza Rice and Clarence Thomas, you'd be standing up against that and saying that these are not real black people, I assume. Well, really? Boy, I need to get Thomas Sowell to run over there. No, really, I mean, because
the
it's culture,
argument,
isn't
I mean,
it? It's
that's
culture,
something
not
that's
racial
beautiful.
color.
That's what makes America great. That's what makes our society work, is when you've got the reflection of those who, it's the same argument of what we see in the courtrooms. What happens when you have the judicial, the judges who are primarily white, and when you have folks who are sitting in front of the courtrooms who are of a different color. You try to bring that balance so that those who are representing or in those positions of power reflect the service needs or that community that they're serving.
But if
We
I'm not
want it in the
mistaken-
classroom, we want it in the courtroom,
But
we
if
want it
I'm not
in
mistaken, the
politics.
NAACP opposed, for example, the nomination of Janice Rogers Brown to the Supreme Court. So, in other words, Janice Rogers Brown is a judge on the D.C. Circuit who's black. The point that I'm making is that it's odd to consider that all black people have the same experience. It's not accurate, meaning that if you're talking about mirroring the experiences of kids in the classroom so that you can identify what's special about these kids, presumably the criteria should not be the color of their skin, but the character of their experience.
No.
Really? Why though? Why?
Because race still matters, because there is still that cultural competency. We're not inside of a race-neutral society. We're not past where race is a thing of the past. It does still matter, and being able to have someone who is aware of that, who knows how to take those cultural familiarities and bring that child who might fall through the cracks based off of that connection, we need that ability. We need that
So
understanding.
if a guy immigrated from Africa literally yesterday, and I pulled him off the plane, you would want him on the Tukwila school board?
No, I want someone who's qualified. Yes, it still matters. I'm just saying you can find the racial
He was the
people
top
of
of the
color
school
who
board
are
where he's from.
qualified. Absolutely.
But he's at the top of the school board where he's from. But he has no relationship whatever to the community. None. And he doesn't know anything about the community. He doesn't know anything about America. He's just a black guy who has school competency, and he's from Uganda. You'd want him on the Tukwila school board as opposed to a white person who was born in Tukwila, who grew up poor in Tukwila, who went to the school in Tukwila, and now wants to be on the school board.
Well, on another
No.
note, I don't remember seeing any.
Where's this African? I want to talk
No,
to
because
him.
the point I'm making is that it's not simply skin color, obviously, and you said that it's culture
I know,
as well.
I know.
And as far as wanting students to have cultural access, the last time I checked, the union passed Common Core standards had nothing to do with color of skin, and what we're having to teach our kids to are these horrific math lessons that I can't even help them with, and that has nothing to do with how tan I am. So it doesn't matter where the teacher came from as long as they pass that union passed Common Core standard across our state.
All right, this is going to be a quick question for each of you, and then I'll give you a chance to respond to what the other panelists have said. The question is, how would your life be different, for Dr. Sechrest, for example, how would your life be different if you were born white? Ben, how would your life be different if you were born more white? No, just kidding. How would your
Wouldn't
life
exist. It's impossible.
Yeah.
He'd need
That,
like
that color
UV
does not
1000.
exist yet,
I'd be
right?
Christian.
How would how would your life be different if you were born black? And we'll just go down the line here, starting with Dr. Seacrest. How do you think your life would be different? Just in a nutshell, maybe 30 seconds to a minute. How do you think your life would be different if you were born white? And then we'll go down the line.
How would my life be different if I was born white? I wouldn't be able to rock this afro.
I saw Janis Joplin once with one.
It's something that I can't imagine. I literally cannot imagine what my life would be like if I didn't have to feel a racial type of oppression. I wouldn't know what it would feel like to be able to visualize that. So to sit there and imagine what it would be like.
Hold off. You can't say no because she's saying what she feels. She says, I feel. You can't deny her feeling. There, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, you're good. And so it's hard for me to be able to do that. I guess that's the short of it. Let me
Skip down the line. Ladies first, because I know they'll stick to the minute rule. Monique, as the only Latina on the stage, or Latino for that matter, although my ancestry is a bit vague, you can answer the question either way. How do you think your life would be different if you were born black? Or how do you think your life would be different if you were born Lily White, Ben Shapiro White?
Yeah, Ben Shapiro white.
I
Well,
can't believe I'm being called white by David Bowes.
That's right.
That's not the pot calling the kettle. I have to tell you something. For the first 13 years of my life, it wouldn't be any different because I grew up with a father and mother born in East Los Angeles that wanted better for their children. And my birth father joined the military. And you know what I learned? 80% of military brats don't identify with race, color of their skin. They identify by all being American. American. And I remember in 1984 being on Peden Barracks in Wertheim, Germany, and Rosalinda Rosa upstairs was Puerto Rican. Katja Rolsey across the street was German. Am I right? My brother's in the audience. Katja Rolsey was German. David Wood's mother was very Presbyterian, very white. So, and then Kum Hee was Korean. So we'd have, spring rolls with some spatzel, and I'd bring, the salsa, and Rosalinda would have fried plátanos, and that's what we did. Because, being on base in the middle of Germany, we all had to come together as Americans. There is zero tolerance for racism, zero tolerance for that. And it was also the fact that we had a greater enemy in Muammar Gaddafi. And it was true in 1984. So how do I think it would be different? I don't think it would, because all of our parents volunteered for one thing, whether we're black, white, Korean, and that was to defend the liberties of the United States of America. And I think we need to get back to that.
Charles, you have a different experience being from Zimbabwe, but how do you think your life would be different had you been born in the United States?
I was almost born in the United States.
Oh, were you? I thought you were from Zimbabwe. Was
Yeah,
it family
I came here when I was
first
5.
generation?
I came here when I was 5, and then I went back to Africa when I was 12. Then I was there for my teen years. But I was just, it's a bizarre question to me. It really is. It's not that I just don't, it's just really hard to understand because I've never really thought about that.
I love the input. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
But one of the things about human beings is that they will tend to read books in order to walk in other people's shoes for a while. So I consider it a valuable intellectual exercise to get people to think about what life might have been. If you have no answer, that's totally okay. There is a time limitation.
But I read James Joyce, or something like that, and I'm like thinking, oh, this is what it's like to be like a white guy, right? I mean, that's like, I don't read it that way at all, right?
There's always PBS.
I don't. What's that? Sorry, what?
There's always PBS and Down
Oh,
Abbey.
PBS, yeah. No, I just think that I think that personally, I've never had a really big problem with being. I've never thought that I wanted to be because I've never thought about like, oh, if I was white, this would mean that the cops wouldn't, would be nicer to me or something like that. Seriously, I just never really think about things like that. When the situation arises, and I do find there's a situation that where I have to be black and I have to be aware of my color, then those things do kick in. But for the most part, they're not. I'm just sorry, they're just not there. And I suppose I could have been white, and I suppose I could have been black. I could have been anything. I mean, this is the nature of the universe. I'm sorry to be so cosmic at this point, but it's just like and that's just one. But I will say that in general, people have to really in Zimbabwe, and I'll go back to Zimbabwe for this. And this is why I say there's going to be racism, because everybody acts like there's oh, there's no racism in the USA. We're all cool now. We're 50 years beyond the civil rights, and everything is getting better, and people believe in progress, and so forth and so on. But in Zimbabwe, I watched with my own eyes for the most part. And I know this. We don't. You when you go there, you just see black people, right? But actually, if you're a black person, you see different people. Even when they're black, right? You see different people doing different things, and you make calls about somebody. You say, oh, that guy's an Indebele. You should watch out, right? Oh, that one's a Xhosa from Zulu. I heard they like to have fun at night.
Charles,
I'm just
Charles,
saying that,
Charles,
we make
I hate
racial
to cut you off,
calls.
but once again, we're learning men have no sense of time.
You
No
always
sense
stop
of
me
time
right when I'm
whatsoever.
about to hit the money point. But I'm just saying we make calls all the time. We don't have to be white. You don't have to be black. You make those kinds of things.
Ben, have you ever thought about it in a nutshell?
In a very nutshell way, all I would say is that I'm sure that I would have experienced challenges that are different than the challenges that I've experienced as, for example, a Jew in America. Well, thank God I'm a Jew in America. This is the greatest country to Jews in the history of the world. As far as what it would be like to be a black person, I grew up with two incredible parents. I grew up in a stable household in a safe area. And, I think that I understand why people would be warier of police officers, given the fact that many police officers are going to react to disproportionate crime statistics with stereotypes. I understand that. But as far as the idea that, I think the reason that David is asking the question, I don't want to question the questioner and go Newt Gingrich style, but I think that the reason that David's asking the question is because there is this idea out there that every person who is born white is born privileged. And I don't think that is accurate, just as I don't think that every person who is born black is born into a horrible situation. I think that we're all born individuals, and if we can start seeing each other that way, we'll all be a lot better off.
I agree.
Yeah, for the record, the actual purpose of my lame question was to allow people to exercise the idea of thinking about it and walking in somebody else's shoes. That's exactly right.
Oh,
All
yeah,
right, I promised I would get to...
I don't want to think about being white because I'm I don't want to be white or something like that. You know what I mean? I don't want to, I wasn't taking that path. It's a great trick. I was just saying, it just never occurred to me. It's just something that's all. Nor am I saying, I'm proud to be black, right? I'm not saying that either. I'm just saying that, you know what I mean? I'm just saying that it doesn't occur to me, and that's all.
If you want to be Jewish, I can convert you.
Yeah,
I mean, work on it.
No. I'm proud to be an ape. You know what I mean? I'm a Darwin kind of guy, right? I'm an ape. I don't have a tail, so I'm not a monkey. You know what I mean? And that's the way I see things. That's my world.
All right, I'm just going to let that go and move instead to the safer category of the hashtag that I promised we would get to. Since Michael Brown's death in Ferguson, protesters, and this is directed, we'll start with Dr. Seacrest, I guess. Since Michael Brown's death in Ferguson, protesters, including many members of Congress and their staff, have used the hands up, don't shoot hands gesture and the hashtag Black Lives Matter, the implication of which is the assumption that Black lives don't currently matter. Given the conclusions of the Justice Department that the evidence supported Officer Wilson, was it wrong or is it wrong to use the hands up, don't shoot as a symbol? And was it wrong for some to declare it was, quote, open season on young black men? Because it gave a false impression to a new generation of young people.
Okay, that was multi-layered. Let's try to answer.
I didn't want to give a
There's
lame
the-
hypothetical there. So
Oh,
I had
that's
to-
right. Someone would call you out
I had
on
to make
that.
it
the man in the
multi-layered,
back.
yeah.
Was it wrong to utilize the hands up, don't shoot, given the indictment decision, or the not to indict? Is that what you asked?
Well, after the Justice Department pointed out that witnesses substantiated the officer's claim and that the hands up, don't shoot didn't actually happen, and that the hashtag Black Lives Matter implies that they don't matter right now, and you have a nation reacting to a singular event for a young black male, basically the question is, doesn't that send a message of hopelessness and despair instead of a message of constructive activity? Is it wrong to use that because it's based on a lie?
Depending on whether or not you, here I'll answer it very easily. The hands up, don't shoot, the Black Lives Movement under the Ferguson decision, it wasn't just what happened there in Ferguson, right? Ferguson became the microcosm of frustrations that many folks throughout the nation, in the towns and the cities, from Jersey to Chicago to Seattle, it touched on that frustration. The Black Lives Matter, the hands up, don't shoot, it was more of a symbolic gesture, not just of what happened in Ferguson, but that was kind of the, this is happening, hear us now. This is the resurgence of the energy that had, gone on from the men who were shot and killed here in Seattle. It was bigger than what just happened in Ferguson. We have to understand that. Not an isolated incident inside of a vacuum. We're talking about generations of folks who felt that they've been oppressed or that their lives didn't matter when it came to a white officer for unarmed matters. That's the frustration. We termed it, we gave it the hashtag. That's the new movement of being able to use social media to take on an existing fight and form of oppression, but it's not just that isolated matter. Do we still have the feelings even after the indictment decision? The National Bar Association, a bunch of lawyers, they held their national conference there in Ferguson because they wanted to challenge the system. As attorneys, they were able to give that analysis of the failures of what the legal system did in coming down in that non-indictment decision. So it wasn't over, but I'd hate for us to walk away thinking Ferguson was just happening in that small town. We've got to broaden our lens, and we have to understand, yes, we used Ferguson, but it was used to talk about something that's happening throughout the country.
Ben, I can get a quick response from you, and then I've got a follow-up question for Monique and a separate follow-up question for Charles.
On the Black Lives Matter idea, I want to find the people. I want to find the people alongside you who think Black lives don't matter. I'm still looking for those people. Really, I mean, the implication is, of course, that for a bunch of people out there, for some reason, they're fine with black people getting shot in the street for no reason. Hands up, don't shoot was based on a lie. That's problematic. The idea that there is a huge number of black young men who are being shot for no reason by police officers is not statistically true. It's just not statistically true. The fact is that according to statistical studies at John Jay College, if you are a white man in a similar confrontation with police, you have a better chance of being shot by police than if you are a young black man. More white men are shot by the police every year in the country than young black men are shot by police in the country. The idea that there is a spate, and there's an easy proof. We know all of their names. We know all of their names. When there are 30 million black men in America. Okay, when we know President Obama said that we have a spate, it's a slow rolling crisis. Once every couple of weeks we have a case that's under dispute. So let's take his statistic. Okay, so let's say it's 26. One is too many, and we all agree. But is it really a slow rolling crisis with a broad trend across the nation when there are 30 million black people in the entire country? And 26 people are shot under disputed circumstances, and probably at least half of those, the cop is at least justified. In Michael Brown, he was justified. Okay, and so basing it on falsities,
here,
you can't base
because
a narrative on lies.
We're running out of time. I want to do a follow-up to Monique, and I'm sure that we'll end up all contributing one more time. Monique, follow-up here on the same category, but in North Charleston, South Carolina, Walter Scott, African-American, father of 4, Coast Guard veteran, was shot multiple times in the back as he fled Officer Michael Slager. Slager now stands charged with murder, and the national coverage of this event has been intense. Now, in February in Pasco, Washington, a homeless Hispanic male was killed by police after being videoed running away from them with his hands literally in the air. This time, his hands were in the air when he was running across the street, and officers shot at him 17 times. Does the disparity in coverage mean that Hispanic lives mean less than Black lives in the United States?
And that's exactly my question when you talk about race in America. Instead of hashtag Black Lives Matter, it should be All Lives Matter. It's a bipartisan issue. All lives matter. All lives. And not just those that are, 17, 18, just being teens. I'm talking as a pro-life advocate. All lives matter. All lives matter in our community, including those that can't speak for themselves. There's a couple things I want to address that, David, if I can. First of all, we're having this conversation, we're on the heels of Baltimore, and I do agree, with the doctor that it is systemic, and, you don't just treat the runny nose, you treat the flu or the cold throughout the body. It's very holistic. But we can't have real conversations about race, because when we do with educated white men, and they want to talk about, the fact that our inner cities are now the current plantations, we're herding the less impoverished people into these inner cities, and then, having liberal progressives lead them and keep them in poverty. We can't have that conversation because we're called racists. We can't. White men can't do that. Doctored, educated white men that say there's some economic value, here's some things that we see that are wrong. We can't have those conversations when there's not a Baltimore and when there's not a Trayvon Martin. We can't, because it's too volatile. And we can't have those conversations. So I'm hoping today will start a different trend. Regarding the Hispanics, just the same as my open, handed slap to my son, there is a huge discussion in America that, what? If you kill one Mexican, another one will cross the border. Another one's gonna cross the border because they're like rabbits and they're everywhere. And that's not just by, Anglo-Saxon Americans, that's by Mexicans to Mexicans. And you know what? I've found in my own life as a Valenzuela, as a single mother, that I'm judged not by hands that don't shoot. I'm judged by how much work, how much of a good citizen I am, and what my children are as my ambassadors and the fruit of my family. And I think in our culture, and especially the Mexican-American culture, we don't have the ability to go out there and start protesting and hashtagging because we'll get deported. Or we'll at least get rounded up by INS, right? So, there is a little bit of that too. Don't send me to Mexico. I can't even speak Spanish. Just saying.
You don't have to worry. No one's getting deported.
Charles, I have a follow-up for you. While Officer Wilson was cleared in the shooting of Michael Brown, the Justice Department did conclude that the broader actions of the Ferguson Police Department shows that the nation's racial history still casts its long shadow upon us. The report concluded that Ferguson's law enforcement practices overwhelmingly impact African Americans. Data collected by the Ferguson Police Department from 2012 to 2014 showed that African Americans account for 85% of vehicle stops, 90% of citations, and 93% of arrests made by the Ferguson Department of Police, despite comprising only 67% of the population. Now, author and Professor John Lott Jr. pointed out in a New York Post column that left unsaid by Attorney General Holder was that the federal government's Bureau of Justice Statistics 2011 Police Public Contact Survey indicated that Black Americans were 31% more likely than whites to be pulled over for traffic stops nationwide. If Black Americans in Ferguson were pulled over at the same rate as Black Americans nationally, they would account for 87.5% of traffic stops, meaning the Ferguson numbers actually suggest that African Americans are less likely to be pulled over in Ferguson. Given this information, is it possible that the Justice Department exaggerated problems in Ferguson to avoid emphasizing the finding that Officer Wilson acted in self-defense?
Oh, wow. Look, that's one naughty question you just asked, because
But you got to admit it wasn't a lame
because it's
hypothetical
going
this
down
time.
one road and then it just did a quick turn to the left. And I was like, oh, so now I've got to answer this question. So you're saying, allow me this, you're saying that basically pointing out that the police was stopping African Americans more than was necessary, that this was a way to avoid facing the fact that that Officer Wilson, if I'm correct, Officer Wilson acted in self-defense. Is that what you're saying? That was usually.
I'm saying that the professor's column made a couple of claims, pointing out that the statistics, while initially shocking and showing a disparity, actually, if you compare them nationwide, they don't necessarily indicate racism. He also pointed out that black males die, or black drivers die in car accidents at a rate twice their proportional share of car ownership. So there's a disparity there in deaths, and deaths have nothing to do with police pulling them over. So the issue was, is the Justice Department, basically they had kind of put themselves out on a limb regarding the death of Michael Brown. Was this a way of basically avoiding that issue?
You know, I have to say one thing. Okay, I honestly don't know what happened. I mean, whatever side you want to take on this issue, I honestly don't know.
I have an answer.
What? Go ahead.
I would say taking the national trend doesn't negate what the Department of Justice was saying in relation to we'll call it the selective enforcement there in Ferguson. Just because, let's say if they used a state like New York, who suffered the same stereotypes of a high arrest rate, a high focus on communities of color. Just because those numbers might be skewed nationally or higher, it doesn't mean that we should stop focusing on Ferguson. I believe the Department of Justice was key on when they focused on that. Forget the national average and say, well, we're better than national, so that means that there's not a problem here. Seattle endured a similar thing. There we were challenging the focusing on certain types of crimes, drug crimes down in Pioneer Square. The question became, well, what about the drug crimes that's happening here in Capitol Hill? And so the study was the selective enforcement. Are you targeting the areas where you know that there's black criminals and you're ignoring the areas where you know that there's white criminals? The Supreme Court did a study talking about the types of crimes that are committed by race and came up with their conclusion that there's not one propensity of one race that commits more crimes than another, but instead it's the different types of crimes. I believe the Department of Justice was trying to reach that aim of saying, don't selectively enforce. We want crime to be enforced. Don't turn a blind eye just based off of the color of their skin. Enforce them all.
This is a yes or no question. Charles, clock time. Sorry, when you said I was going to say one thing, I was going to say if you could stick to that, I'll buy you a drink. But at this point,
I was going to say one thing.
If it's one, I'm going to time it.
We were talking about traffic violations. That's all. We weren't even talking about heavy duty robbery or something like this. We're really talking about the issue is in Ferguson is that the city government received about 25% of its revenue from traffic violations and fees and court fees and so forth and so on. And they weren't just simply giving people tickets. They were demanding that they pay for these tickets in court, and if they didn't pay for them, they'd throw them in jail. I mean, they'd throw them in jail. I'm sorry. That's what they were doing. That's what the report said. It wasn't. What I'm sort of surprised at is when you look at this and you look at this entire thing.
Charles,
you know what did the mayor say? What did the mayor say when they brought this up to him?
It's never
he said,
one
thing. The other suburb does 75%. I'm not even that bad, right? I mean, but the question is like, I mean, if you look at that, you have to say, all right, my God. This is not a good system.
Well, I agree it's not good, but is it racism or government venality? I mean, as I say about it, is it racism or government being corrupt? Meaning that in the city of Seattle, for example, they can't fill a pothole, but they become evil geniuses when it comes to the parking meters. Right?
Yeah, no. But the question is, a lot of people would ask me and say, "Oh, why didn't the African Americans in Ferguson like step up, and complain about this?" And they say, "No, they did. They did, and
Right.
nobody did anything." And you know what? And the situation got so bad that finally something happened, and it exploded. And everybody wanted, "Oh, what are these people upset about, eh? What are they upset about?" It's like they've been fleeced day in, day out by this particular law enforcement system, and nobody did bloody anything about it. And they couldn't even get anybody to address. I remember one of the things people would
Charles,
say.
I agree
that
with you.
sounds like a column for the Seattle Stranger. Let's hold that
Right.
thought
No, I was
for a
just going
moment.
to say I agree with Charles that we should cut government expenditures so that we can cut government receipts and enforcement of receipts dramatically, so that the police are less in our lives.
The police were going
Charles,
for the community
Charles, you're killing me
because
here.
of budget,
Charles.
austerity. Sorry.
Unlike the TV show,
The
TV
police
show,
need more money.
This is like the worst remake of Charles in Charge that I can think of here. And
You didn't
Sorry,
tell me
Scott
Scott
Baio.
Baio was going to be here.
real quickly,
it's me.
yeah, Scott Bale. Real quickly, just to
me
be
when
fair
I'm
to-
white.
To be fair to the columnist. Yeah, good point. To be fair to the columnist, he did point out that Washington, D.C. has also put people in jail for this kind of thing, and it's hard for the poor. But I want a yes or no answer to this question, and this is across the board, a recent survey showed that whether you're black, white, or Hispanic, Americans believe that race relations have gotten worse under President Obama. The yes or no question is, are you hopeful for the future? In 30 years, will we still be having the same conversation, or do you think we'll be living in a post-racial society?
That was
by
an
and
or.
large.
That was an or. So which is the yes and which is the no?
Are you hopeful or not hopeful? We'll change it that way instead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not hopeful.
I get up at 3, people. 3.
Not hopeful.
So, yeah. Go ahead.
Not hopeful.
Not hopeful.
Climate change could change things. I mean, it could. White people and black people might get along with the severe climate change.
Why does it get a D? I didn't get a D option.
Hopeful.
All right. Neither did Charles now, because I want to thank the Online Trading Academy for sponsoring this event. It wouldn't be possible without them. Now, I want to urge you to join us at ktth.com and Facebook and our blogs and website at mynorthwest.com. I would also like to say that it's always easier to go to a place where everybody, or at least most of the people, agree with you. So how about a special round of applause for Dr. Shalice Seacrest and Charles Mujady. I want to say a special thank you to both of you for coming. I think we proved a civil and lively conversation about race is possible, at least in Seattle. Ben and I and the other panelists are invited to come out to the lobby and pose for pictures with anybody who wishes. And I want to thank all of you for coming and making these events possible. Thank you.